You can't munch just one on Stryker's Perspective. Stryker's back again. That's right, it's Stryker of Enyo, and I'm coming to you as Jason because, well, I know it's Stryker's Perspective, and that's my channel, but I'm coming to you as Jason because this is more the serious stuff, where I'm not yelling and screaming and swearing at games like Stardew Valley, or what was that other video I made? Well, my top moments of the week, or how the F did I die, you know, that's... It's still me, you know, but this is the more serious side where I actually don't swear during these videos, because these are more constructive, kind of like my gameplay stuff. Or, I mean, not the gameplay, but the game tips. But yeah, so we're going to be talking about Nintendo, but first, just to get it out of the way, if you didn't see in my description of the retro engine Sigma, I actually did put money down on that for the Indiegogo campaign for it, so I will be getting mine around June. There's early adopters that are going to be getting theirs in April, so around April-ish or so, you might actually see some YouTubers start putting their thoughts and stuff on it. But I'm going to give you my thoughts when I actually get the device, because, you know, that's the way you're supposed to do it, right? I wasn't an early adopter, so I'm not going to get it as soon, but I'll let you guys know about the Retro Engine Sigma, because if they start up another Indiegogo campaign for it and take more orders, maybe that's something that some of you might like if you're not really that big on maybe, you know, trying to do any kind of soldering yourself, or if you just don't want to buy a Raspberry Pi 3 and you just want to have a product that's all put together for you. I'll give you some info about that. But we're going to be talking about Nintendo, and what's the problem with Nintendo now, or at least with the Nintendo Switch nearly on the horizon. So this could be a long time topic for Nintendo, but basically this is coming from a fan of Nintendo, and a lot of people, like a lot of newer fans of Nintendo, they're often like, well, why do you guys that are in your 30s and you know, even later, why do you guys defend Nintendo, and why do you always, you know, kind of root for them, but you always get disappointed? And you know, we always hope Nintendo, you know, will, because we grew up with Nintendo, you know, us guys that are in our 30s and 40s, I guess, yeah, they would still play Nintendo. You know, we grew up on Nintendo, and, you know, you had the NES, and everybody had an NES. Even if you weren't really big on video games, and even if you never went back to video games. And the same thing with Super Nintendo. Super Nintendo was huge too, and that was awesome, and it was great. And, you know, and it wasn't like Nintendo could do no wrong. I mean, no one in this industry actually leads for very long. Not very few actually have two successful consoles back to back. Or not more than that. Even Sony hasn't had two consoles that have been really successful back-to-back. They consider PlayStation 3 kind of a failure on some part. But anyway, it's not about that. This is just Nintendo. This is just what I think of Nintendo. A longtime fan that's had... I played Nintendo games before, but I mean, I got my parents bought me my NES back in '87. I know that because that's when they started to sell the Mario and Duck Hunt with the light gun collection kind of like thing, or the packaging for it, as far as I've been able to tell. I thought it was 86, but it had to have been 87, because that's when that product came out. That's when a lot of us got it, you know, when it was Mario and Duck Hunt and a Zapper. So I'm just going to tell you, you know, my feelings on Nintendo and what it's been like to be a fan of Nintendo. I'm not looking at Wikipedia pages. I'm not, you know, I'm not someone that's... you know, trying to look up information and recall this stuff. This is just coming straight off the top of my head, and this is how I feel about Nintendo, because I was there, and, you know, just to kind of give you an idea of what it's like. I mean, original Nintendo, that was great. It was awesome. And sure, they ended up having a monopoly, and they ended up all giving us $5 at one point, for those that know. And but we thought that was cool. You know, we didn't really know that Nintendo was having a monopoly on the gaming industry. And then Super Nintendo was coming around, and you know, Super Nintendo was great. You know, more colors, more power. And but you know, Genesis really had some cool games too, and Genesis really tried. So I have no qualms if you were a Genesis fan, especially if you got it before Super Nintendo came out. I mean, once Super Nintendo came out, you know, it was like, oh shoot, that's a better machine. But then again, the GameCube was a better machine than the PlayStation 2, and it didn't really sell that well. But anyway, so Super Nintendo was great, but I was the one of those few people that actually ended up getting a 3DO. Not when it was $600 or $800. I got mine initially when it was $400, and then it actually dropped fairly quickly in price to $300. So, excuse me, I was actually playing 32-bit games before a lot of my friends, and you know, Nintendo decided to go with cartridges for Nintendo 64, and that was a pretty big deal. They kept saying the access speed for CD-ROMs were no good, and you know, they were toting this the graphics, the Silicon graphics, you know, chipset, and making a big deal about that. But ultimately, Silicon graphics, as great as it was, it could only manipulate 100,000 texture mapped polygons at the time, and that was when I believe PlayStation and Saturn could both at least do twice that, you know, with texture map. Often you'll hear like a figure of, shoot, it's been a while, forgive me on the number, but I think they were saying like non-texture map polygons, PlayStation 1 could do like 400,000. But either way, you know, yeah, PlayStation and he's dead. PlayStation and Saturn could, I believe, both do at least 200 or 250,000 polygons a second with texture maps. So that was a big deal. And Nintendo games often looked blurry, and quite honestly, the cartridge format that Nintendo chose at that time was horrible. It was downright horrible. I mean, eventually, you know, CDs became, you know, 2 times speed and 3 times and 4 times. So the accessing got better, and it really wasn't that bad. I believe the Neo Geo CD was one of the only home consoles that had a 1-time CD, and that was pretty bad. But PlayStation and Saturn really weren't horrible, and the games looked better, sad to say. Nintendo had some big stuff on Nintendo 64, of course. The cartridges actually worked, but but from what I remember, Sony had a policy of $10 per game. So if you, you know, if you were buying 100,000 games, it would cost you $10 a game, and Sony would handle the manufacturing of the disc, the manual, and the packaging for the game. And then, of course, they had their royalty, I believe, on top of that. But if you wanted to make a game for Nintendo, cartridge prices, I saw estimates of around like $32 back then, but they were at least above $20. You know, some companies might have made a deal. So if you wanted to put your game on a Nintendo system, it cost you $20 alone just to manufacture each thing. Plus, Nintendo then had its, if you didn't notice, this is Spy Hunter. I'm actually playing the arcade versions of Nintendo games, so Nintendo can't claim the video. So, and because I'm on Xbox One, I can't record footage in Nintendo games. I have to just insert it. So yeah, Spy Hunter and some of these games. I got Pit Fighter coming up. Aside from what you saw, Metal Gear Solid 5, that's obviously not on Nintendo. But yeah, so, you know, it cost you a lot more. Nintendo's third-party support was horrible for Nintendo 64. I mean, I was a guy that had, you know, at the point where I had 50 games for my original Xbox and 50 games for my PlayStation 2, I only had maybe a dozen for my Nintendo 64, or maybe 15 for my GameCube, you know, in comparison. You know, I mean, sure, I had, you know, stuff from Silicon Knights, of course, for the GameCube, you know, and I think I had a Mario game in there. You know, the unpopular one, of course, Mario Sunshine. You know, but yeah, it's just, and obviously if it was multi-platform, I would get it for Xbox or PlayStation 2, but I mean, that was it. You know, Nintendo would make news every time Miyamoto would have a game, you know, that he had worked on or touched or even thought about or had, you know, something of a connection with. You know, that stuff would make news, and that was like one game a year. and that was kind of the way Nintendo was, for Nintendo 64. I mean, everybody wanted Zelda. Everybody wanted Mario. And, Pilot Wings is okay. But, I mean, yeah, anything, Dinosaur Planet, which Miyamoto, talked about and turned into Star Fox Adventures, Nintendo would have, around one game a year. And, maybe you would pick yourself up an extra game if you were feeling, lucky. That's what it was like being a Nintendo fan on the Nintendo 64. I mean, if you love Pokemon, I guess you had more, but that became more of a handheld thing, right? So yeah, and that's what it was like for Nintendo. The GameCube sold, Nintendo 64 was about 36 million units sold worldwide. Nintendo, the GameCube was, I think, 24 or 25 million, so that actually did pretty poorly. And actually, it might have been 21 million. I get my numbers confused. I think Super Nintendo was 24. Like I said, I'm talking just off the top of my head. I didn't want to be looking up stuff. I didn't want to be, that kind of person that, had all these facts but didn't know what the hell they were talking about. I'm just talking about my experience. Not sales figures. I didn't want to have any kind of Wikipedia pages opened or anything. But yeah, and I had all the major consoles except, the TurboGrafx 16 and the Neo Geo. That was it. I just drew a blank for a second. And I had multiples of some consoles, but Nintendo consoles, well, aside from the NES, I had 5 of those. But Nintendo consoles, I usually only needed one. But like PlayStation, I think I had a couple different PlayStations. Because my first one went kaput. Then I had to get a second one, and then I got the PS1 actual version, the slimmed down version. PlayStation 2, I believe I only had the one. I don't think I needed to get a replacement, but anyway. So yeah, and for those that know, I ended up losing my whole game collection. I ended up losing my house as well. But my game collection I had in storage for a while, but I was working for a friend and he couldn't pay me because he wasn't, in turn, getting paid very much, but I was helping him out. So long story short, that's what it was. I don't regret it whatsoever, and I never want to have bad feelings toward him. But yeah, all my whole game collection, 200 PlayStation games, 70 for this system. Dreamcast, I think I had 70. Super Nintendo was probably 100. Regular Nintendo was probably around 100. Genesis was maybe, I might have had 60 or 80. I can't remember anymore. It might have not been as much for Genesis. I came a little bit later on the Genesis train, but that's what it's been like for Nintendo. This isn't about me, it's about Nintendo. So Nintendo's been really hard to embrace, new technology. Once they even went with the disc, it was that little tiny disc in GameCube, They don't want you to use their system as a multimedia player device. They don't want you to play DVDs on their system, And the same thing with the Nintendo Switch. They're not going to support Netflix, from what I've heard. So online has been really hard for Nintendo. Like Nintendo and digital games. Why can't we download digital versions of GameCube games that are expensive as hell? And, why can't we have those? I mean, I know the Wii was backwards compatible with the GameCube, but why can't we download, those favorite games of ours? I know they have ROMs for Nintendo 64. Not many, from what I understand. They would bring out maybe a couple a year or something, or a couple every month. I died there. So yeah, that's Nintendo. That's the Nintendo we know. It was a system you would have maybe, the tier is a bit much. But Nintendo was the system where, you just didn't care about online play. You didn't care about having parties. You didn't care about talking to your friends, using voice chat of any kind. You didn't have a large collection of digital games that were going to carry over to the next system. Yeah, it just didn't happen. Nintendo hasn't even really unified their storefront, from what I've heard. For the Nintendo Switch, they said we're working on it when it came to, are the games that people have bought on the Wii Shop and the 3DS store, are they going to carry over? And then, you know, Nintendo can't even tell us, you know, at this point, you know, what, 2 months away from launching their new console, and they can't even tell us if the old game, well, I suppose it took a while for backwards compatibility even to come to Xbox One, right? But when I look at my games list on Xbox One, I've got 2 different hard drives hooked up to it at the same time at all times, and I've got, I believe, 325 games. Now, you know, a certain portion of those games are digital Xbox 360 games that I've bought also. You know, all the ones that are backwards compatible, along with all the games that I've bought, you know, and have gotten free as well. I pretty much downloaded and kept every single one. But yeah, on my Xbox One, you know, if I lose internet right now, I can play all those games. I'm not sure about the Xbox One games with gold that you get for free, but I know the 360 games are ours to keep for free. I believe PlayStation Plus members are supposed to have them free too. It used to be where you had to have PlayStation Plus in order to play some of the games for free, but I believe they changed it, someone told me. But yeah, so Nintendo is just a console where you don't get a whole lot of options. You know, you don't get downloadable GameCube games. You don't get downloadable Wii games. You know, everything needs to run on a disc, and everything, you know, just wear and tear on that CD drive. It's going to be needing replacing at some point. So I hope the best for Nintendo. If they can give us new games on this new system on a regular basis, hey, more power to them.